So today's going to be a little, I guess you could say, anecdotal. Um, I follow getting back into markets, which I was talking about yesterday, and trying to follow finance and economics. Um, my main concern, like the concerns of a lot of people, other than straight consumer price inflation and the cost of goods going up, is cost of housing going up. Cost of housing has gone up reliably every year for about 10 years at this point. Bottomed around 2011, 2012. And a lot of people don't realize that prices now are substantially higher than they were at the peak in 05 and 06. Certainly in my area, housing is a lot more expensive than it was back then at the peak of the last bubble. A lot of people here would kill to pay for a house now what people were able to pay back in, in 05. I saw a house listed here recently on MLK for almost $300,000, and I believe the house was under 1,000 square feet. So that just gives you an idea of, in my town, just how hot the real estate market is. And I was speaking to a realtor who was working with some clients, a young couple who were trying to buy their first house. God help them. And they put in an offer on a house. It was a 2-bedroom house, and I think that it was also listed right around $300,000. I don't know where their offer was. I didn't ask that many details, but the realtor was telling me that this was on the first or second day, the third day maybe. It was in the right after the house was listed. The listing agent told her, "Don't even bother, writing your offer, because I've already got 76 offers on the house." So first-time home buyers with probably getting like an FHA mortgage or something like that, which has some strings attached, which makes it a little less desirable than, let's say, a cash offer, and probably not substantially over the list price. These people have no chance. And this is a lot of money for a relatively meager and modest house. I mean, yeah, I get it. Houses are not as expensive here as they are in, let's say, California, but they're getting closer. California is losing a bit of value, and Florida is through the roof. And so, at some point, if this trend continues, housing prices here in towns that you've never heard of, not necessarily the big name towns like Miami, which are already which are more expensive to begin with. Although in not all cases, sometimes major cities, because they're bigger and have more inventory, prices don't rise as much as in some of the smaller towns. For example, in 2020, I believe housing prices in Dade County, which is where Miami is, were like flat. They didn't go up at all. But where I am, it went up I think over 15%. I don't want to say 20% because I think that'd be wrong. But something that realtor told me, just their opinion, that really stuck out to me in the context of all the Great Reset stuff that people have been discussing over the last few months, and about how powerful people are buying up all the housing and are going to force the average person into being a serf who has to rent for their entire life, making ownership completely untenable. What they said to me was that we're getting to the point in the housing market where pretty much only cash buyers have a real chance of being able to own a home. And who's paying cash for a home when a 2-bedroom starter home is over $300,000? It's not a 20-something or even a 30-something couple looking to have kids, who has no kids yet, trying to buy their first home. Those are not the people paying cash. $350,000 cash, $400,000 cash, even $300,000 cash. Those are not the people. The people who have that much to pay cash, maybe they're retired industrialists or professionals, doctors, lawyers, people who made a lot of money in their career and now retired and they're looking to invest their money. Or maybe someone who's looking to buy a home to come down to Florida and retire. Those are the only people who really have a shot at buying a house. And that's a pretty small pool of buyers, relatively speaking. That just tells you how many people are in the market to buy a home right now. If we're getting to the point to where, cash buyers, which are a slim percentage of the people who are looking to buy a home, because as you know, when we're talking about items that are this big, there's just not that many people who have that much liquid cash. It takes most people 30 years to pay down that much money. That's why we have 30-year mortgages. That's the only way that most people are ever able to afford these astronomical housing prices, even in normal times. That's just how expensive a house is. It's a big ticket item. But now we're at a point where that very slim fraction of the population are the only people who can even dream of owning a home. And this is not something that we saw even back in 05 and 06. Like I said, prices, sure, in nominal terms are much higher now than they were then. But I mean, this phenomenon to where nobody was able to buy a house. I mean, sure, people were buying them. People were paying a lot of money. Or I shouldn't say that. People were purchasing homes at a very high price because they weren't paying it out of pocket. They had loans. That's the difference. Back then, it was mortgages that were fueling the bubble. But now, the people who are getting loans, and the government-backed loans in particular, the ones that are easier to get, the people who are less qualified to be able to pay for a home and a mortgage, those people are shut out entirely. Back then, the prices were only pushed that high because so many people were brought in to the market. Because you brought in all of these extra buyers who ordinarily wouldn't be able to buy a house. They were the ones driving the prices up. Now that's not the case. Those people are completely shut out. It's tough to get a mortgage. And, if you do get one, you're at a huge disadvantage compared to all these people who are willing to pay cash and who somehow have the cash to pay. And so interest rates, if you think about it, at least in this area, interest rates are not as directly relevant as they were back then. Because for those of you who haven't thought through this or haven't listened to me talk about this before, the basic idea is that you get a housing bubble because interest rates are so low. And if the lower your interest rate is, the less, the larger a principal you can take out in a loan and still be able to make the same monthly payment. So let's say you're able to afford $2,000 a month. You have that budgeted for rent or for a mortgage. If the rate of interest is 10% versus 2%, a bigger chunk of that $2,000 a month is going to have to be allocated towards interest. And so your principal can't be nearly as big as if interest rates are 2%. And so if you lower interest rates, that will drive up the price of housing. But now that's, it's more indirect. I guess you could say that there would be more cash buyers driven into the housing market because they're chasing yield. These are people who are just trying to buy assets and, earn an income off of them. And if, bonds are paying under 5%, even if you're buying, toxic waste junk bonds, buying a house and earning at least around 5%, after you pay, a management company, hopefully, that becomes, that looks pretty attractive. This is how I explained BlackRock, I think it was BlackRock, not Blackstone, buying up entire neighborhoods in Texas, I believe it was, somewhere outside of Dallas. They bought up an entire brand new development just to rent out all the houses. And so if that's the case, then rising interest rates would still prick this bubble, even if it is cash buyers who aren't directly looking to borrow the money, who aren't looking at the cost of how much it costs them to borrow money. They already have the money. These same people will then, if interest rates rise, will say, hey, well, then I don't need to have my money in housing. I can go put it in, some financial derivative and earn 5-ish% and not have the upkeep and the carrying costs of an actual house. So I guess you could look at this as houses are sort of the final frontier. They're the one asset that still has a positive yield in terms of income. Sure, you buy stocks, you can get equity, you can get capital gains, but you're not generating income off of that. If you own a rental house, you see that rent check coming into your bank account every month. And considering that mortgage rates can't get much lower than they already are, as inflation starts to not eat away, but add and contribute to a higher and higher cost of living, well, if somebody's making the same amount of money and the cost of goods and food and all that is going up and gas is going up, they have less money then to spend on housing. As a percentage, as a portion of their budget, that's going to shrink. And so individual normal people's buying power when it comes to housing, I think, is actually shrinking. And so that if ordinary people who get loans were the ones really driving the demand for housing, you would start to see housing prices plateau and drop off because people just can't afford to keep paying more and more for housing. Their incomes are not growing that fast, certainly, and their cost of living is growing now. Their cost of living ex housing is growing, and so therefore they're not going to be able to afford to pay as much for housing. And so, I guess you'll see people leaving these areas, and then therefore you would think there would be less demand for rent. But certainly in my area right now, it's impossible to find anywhere even to rent, let alone buy. But I guess that's what you read about in retrospect when people say, oh, nobody could have possibly seen this coming, which that line is always BS. That's people trying to cope with how bad they missed what was coming. But whenever you're at the top of a bubble, you're at the blow-off top, the crack-up boom, whatever you want to call it, that's when things look, the craziest and the most hopeless. And it looks like it's going to go on this way forever until it stops. But again, I've looked at the past. I look at all these things. I look at what has pricked bubbles in the past, and it's just not happening here. I spent a lot of time trying to analogize the current inflation to the rise in inflation leading up to the 2008 crash. But the difference is back then, the Fed was raising interest rates. And that, in my opinion, is what pricked the bubble. And so we're seeing inflation now without the Fed raising interest rates. And so maybe, it is more appropriate to compare what we're going through now to the early stages of, the 1970s. Because what was it back in the 70s that the Fed absolutely did not want to do? It was raise interest rates. It wasn't until Volcker that they did what was needed to be done. Because remember, like I always say, I don't have all the answers. I'm just trying to think through things out loud here. I'm trying to rationalize through everything. I'm trying to process information. Trying to compare the present to the past. And of course, the first rule of investing, past performance is not indicative of future results. But it's the best we have to go on. You have to use history and try and understand, learn the lessons of history if you're ever going to understand the future to any degree. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.